This podcast is recorded on the traditional and unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh people.
British Columbia, I've seen your mountains high, seen your pretty rainbows and your blue crystal skies, watched your winding rivers as they flow around the bend. To me, you're not a stranger, you'll always be a friend.
Coming to you from the West Coast, this is Politicos. Today is November 14th, 2019. This is episode 164.
I'm Scott DeLunderbaum.
And I'm Ian Bushfield. On today's show, the BC Liberals tell us what they're against, and maybe what they're for, and we look at the proliferation of groups in the Senate. First, we have to thank those who help make this show possible. There's 71 people who contribute on Patreon every month. We lose a couple patrons every month from credit cards expiring and people just having different financial situations. So please help us maintain our subscriber base and keep it growing by joining at patreon.com/politicos. Also a shout out to Cortado Productions for editing support for this and all our recent shows. Check them out online. It was great to see them at Vancouver Podfest recently. And Politicos is in partnership with BC Today, British Columbia's daily newsletter dedicated exclusively to BC politics. Sign up for a free trial to have unique coverage of the BC legislature delivered to your inbox every morning. Listeners to Politicos enter the offer code CITIZEN for access to a special rate. For your free 2-week trial of the newsletter, visit britishcolumbiatoday.ca. Let's kick it off by talking about the clearest choice for all of BC. The BC Liberal Party did a weird sort of soft launch of their upcoming platform this last week.
It's like a soft launch, or I guess a teaser of what's to come, or floated out a skeleton platform, so to speak. So this actually came out last week. We didn't cover it because we were doing the live show at the Podcast Fest. We thought we'd dig into it this week.
Yeah, the document's titled A Clear Choice for All of BC, Opportunity for All of BC, and you can read along at home or on your phone at bcliberals.com/clearchoice, all one word. The intro of the page starts off, Andrew Wilkinson and the BC Liberal team have been working hard to stand up for British Columbians and hold the NDP Green Coalition accountable for decisions that make your life less affordable. So right off the bat, they start with a lie.
Yeah, there's no actual coalition.
I mean, it's a wonky technical point at this point, but that's the show you're listening to. So NDP Green Alliance Agreement.
Confidence and Supply Agreement. I don't know. Do they have a character limit here or something?
I think the point that they're trying to get is to tie the Greens to the NDP, because the Greens are realistically the bigger challenger to the BC Liberals. Not that the Greens are going to form government, but they can steal enough votes to prevent the Liberals from becoming government.
They may also steal enough votes to prevent the NDP from becoming government again.
Or
it's big.
Or any future majorities. So the Liberals continue on. Here are some of the issues and solutions, and I think we'll get to how there aren't actually that many solutions, but they do talk about a lot of issues that are top of mind for our party as we plan for the next election, whenever that might be.
Yeah, this isn't the first bit of election prep they've been doing. They've been putting out calls for candidates for, feels like a year now, but I don't actually have the date in front of me when they started doing it. But yeah, they've been pushing hard to kind of bring in a new generation of candidates as well. So they clearly have elections on their mind.
Well, let's jump right into it, and I think we can cover most of this in order. The first one off the bat is 1 million more people in 25 years. That's not a promise, really. It's so much as just a recognition of the population growth of BC, which is kind of weird to lead off with. Like, if they were committing, we will bring 1 million people into BC, that'd be interesting. But they're just kind of like, this is going to happen.
They couldn't, because that's the federal government's job to handle immigration.
Well, they can talk about jobs and job creation and attracting people. But this is more, we need to cope with the 1 million people who are coming. And here they talk about, quote, generational investments in transit, roads, bridges to reduce congestion, ensure private sector builds the right mix of housing to create affordable options, and make real progress on safe, affordable childcare.
All good stuff. But what I actually like about this is that it leads off in a way that focuses quite a bit on Metro Vancouver, which is something the BC Liberals have not been great at talking about. Up until now, they've played a lot more to the rural base of the party, which is fine. But, as we saw with the federal Conservatives, that strategy will only get you so far. And by putting Metro Vancouver issues front and center on this, I think it's a good sign that they are hopefully moving back towards focusing more on Metro Vancouver, where they actually need to pick out the seats to win in the next election.
And talking about investing in transit infrastructure is something. If that can be a consensus position going into the next election, I think we'll both be happy.
Yes.
Like if all parties are like fighting over who will build the most transit, great stuff. The rest of it is vague, but promising. There's nothing here that I oppose. I mean, ensuring the private sector builds the right mix of housing is a good talking point, but
It's tough to do.
especially as the provincial government.
Well, in theory, they have more tools than the city governments, but that's only if they actually want to pick a giant fight with the cities and overrule them. Which isn't the worst idea, but it's the sort of political... Kryptonite isn't the right word, but it's definitely dangerous games politically, so you can see why they're not doing it.
Let's move into the next major section, restoring BC's economic advantage. And here's where they complain about taxes. They don't really note that BC still has a AAA credit rating and is still among the best job creation and like lowest unemployment in Canada, if not the lowest.
Yeah, and also have generally pretty competitive tax rates.
So there's not really an economic advantage to be restored, but they want to talk about all the taxes the NDP has brought in and how they will get rid of at least the employer health tax, maybe. At least that's the only one they single out here.
Yeah, and if you're going to look at a tax that might actually impact job creation, a payroll tax, which is what the employer health tax is probably one of the better ones to look at because it is a direct disincentive to hire people. It increases labor costs. And that means, yeah, companies are going to be less willing to hire people, especially kind of the marginal employee who may or may not be worth the amount of money they'd have to shell out for the services they provide to the company. That gets shifted a bit when payroll taxes get applied. So it kind of made sense that they're going to focus on that one. What isn't talked about is how they replace all the revenue, which is important because healthcare is our largest single expense as a province, and that money has to come from somewhere.
Well, they could go back to the recommendations that the MSP Elimination Task Force, whatever its name was, started to draft up. Friend of the pod, Lindsay Tedds, chaired that and had some nice recommendations about a balanced, spread the load around, make it resilient, do some broader cleanups to the tax code.
Yeah, there was some good stuff in there, too. But the government plowed ahead before that was really even finalized or the ink had dried on it.
What the BC Liberals do say that they will commit to is, quote, reducing the burden of taxes and red tape, making our province a global destination for technology and innovation where we attract and create the jobs of the future, which is, again, nice talking point, and the cut red tape is a pretty standard center-right talking point at this point. Like, did they not cut enough red tape while in government? Or has so much accumulated in the last 2 and a bit years?
Talking to the BC Liberals I know, the answer will be both.
Okay. Moving on, the next major heading is making housing more affordable. As people very interested in urban issues, we should both expect lots to come from here. They list all the NDP promises and how they've struggled to meet them, which is a fair criticism, I think. But then they just say they will do bold action on supply. And then they'll get rid of the speculation tax with a pre-sale condo flipping tax. It's like the first concrete thing in here. And their goal there is to crack down on real speculation and not, quote, hardworking homeowners. It'd be nice to know what they would actually do to build housing that the NDP is not. It turns out it's actually just slow and hard to get shovels in grounds.
Yeah, especially when you have to fight the...
Maple Ridge.
I was actually going to talk about Burnaby because there was a good story in I think it was Burnaby Now, where they looked into why it's taking so long to get one of the temporary modular housing projects done, and it was entirely based around the city of Burnaby just taking way too long to get them permits for anything. But yeah, and that's a city that actually says it wants temporary modular housing. Yeah, you have places like Maple Ridge where they're just fighting each other, and in that case, the provincial government's actually stepped in and said, no, you just have to take this modular housing. You don't really have a choice here, which probably does make the permit in a little quicker.
On the other side of this, the speculation tax, I think the numbers have shown it's not hitting that many British Columbians, and those it is hitting are people who are wealthy enough to have 2 or 3 properties under their name. And so I feel like the sympathy for this, we need to kill the speculation tax, just isn't out there except among like the BC Liberal donor class.
Yeah, I don't think this is going to be a hugely popular one. The pre-sale condo flipping tax is interesting, but it's not really clear that pre-sales of condos are a major driver of unaffordability in the housing market.
But are you even able to flip condos pre-sale at this
you
point?
can.
Like, because when I bought my condo pre-sale in Burnaby, it was like we didn't own it, right? We had a deposit down on it, and we didn't actually get the mortgage and the title to it until the building closed and we moved in. And so I'm
Generally, I think
maybe
there's a reassignable.
Okay.
Yes. Usually the developer will charge a fee to reassign it or something, but yeah, there's definitely been stories about pre-sales changing
I guess I'm not
hands.
going into the shady market of trying to do that. I wanted somewhere to live.
Yeah, also, you probably haven't been hanging out on the hashtag VanRE Twitter, which is a really good thing, because that is a full of terribleness. But
Yeah, I saw you were taking a break from Twitter. That's probably good
that
for
has
the health.
been, definitely the right call on that one.
But yeah, pre-sale condo flipping tax would probably be widely supported.
Yeah,
Even if
and
it's
it
not
might
the
be one of
biggest.
those things where they want to pull back on a policy that's generally popular but not among their base and replace it with something that's, seems like it might pass the sniff test, but...
I say, why not both? Tax all the things. Moving on to the next major heading, providing a pathway to recovery. Here they talk about the NDP's failure on the mental health and addictions files and say that they will give people suffering from mental health and addictions challenges more than just a roof over their heads, with a full spectrum of care and real opportunities to get off drugs and lead healthy, productive lives. What I really like is they note Andrew is the only leader who has actually treated mental health and addictions on the front lines. I mean,
Okay.
Judy Darcy, the Minister of Mental Health and Addictions, I'm pretty sure has been on the front lines as well, but also frontline.
Well, they did
Action.
say leader.
Yeah, no,
Oh,
I
yeah.
know that they're not.
Yeah.
I'm not saying they're lying.
John Horton's, labor background doesn't exactly lead itself to...
And Andrew Weaver and whoever replaces him probably won't have been on the front lines either. But that's not necessarily who you want in the premiers or even the minister office. It's weird. Anyway, they don't give
Well, it's not-
specifics.
That, well, it's a pretty standard thing you see in political communications.
It's overrated, is what I'm saying.
It's a cliche.
Yeah. There's definitely no clearer information here, though. This is another one of those really tough policy files to handle. I think the NDP deserves some credit for slowing down the number of opioid deaths. I think that's borne out. But, it's just going to take a long time and a lot of money that unless the BC Liberals come forward and say we're going to put $1 billion at new programs and things, there's not an easy path here. Or, a bold position would be we're going to adopt the provincial health officer's recommendation to quasi-decriminalize all drugs in this province by telling the police not to enforce possession. But I don't think that'll fly with the BC Liberal base. Some of
You'd be
it,
surprised.
but not the Langley part of it and the further up the valley.
This is one of those areas where I think usually more telling where the party's just promising to do stuff on and make it a priority, just because, like you said, it is a really complicated, tough file that has a lot more to do with how frontline services are provided than what's happening necessarily in the minister's office.
Yeah, I think I said before the show that this is one of those lines that could have been pulled from any of the party's platforms in 2017. It's vague. It says we need to do stuff that the government isn't doing or the other guys won't do. The NDP promised to create a Ministry of Mental Health and Addictions, and that was checked off. Whether that's been helpful or not is debatable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're just not going to see the resources and expertise in a political party's office, especially when in opposition, to actually put together a plan with the level of detail you'd really need to do it. Just those expertise exists in the ministry, not in partisan hacks.
Well,
No offense to our partisan hack listeners.
into the more hacky policy lines, the BC Liberals are also promising affordability and choice in auto insurance. Here they're talking about giving BC drivers the choice they deserve and stop John Horgan from cranking up your auto insurance bill every year, which is not how it works. But I think the point they're trying to get at is break the ICBC monopoly and introduce at least some private auto insurance options in BC.
Yeah, something the Liberals have been pushing for a while now. I'm not surprised to see it in here. it's unclear on how much it will help or hurt. Every province is different, but it really varies, and there isn't a clear delineation among the provinces on which model gets you the cheapest insurance. I think Ontario is the most expensive, and it's private, but I was paying significantly less than I do now on a private insurance in New Brunswick. So like, who knows? It's the devil will be in the details if it ever does move in that direction.
Well, and I think what we've seen from David Eby's work on this file is there's so many deep underlying issues on the auto insurance that there is no silver bullet. Like his limiting expert witnesses actually did seem like one of the best ways
Although
to
that
cut
got
down.
struck down in a court case. We didn't
Exactly.
talk about that when it was announced, but
So one of the costs of our insurance is court cases, and ICBC is often representing both sides in a two-vehicle collision, and both sides are bringing in expert witnesses, and it's an arms race that they're fighting themselves with, where the taxpayers lose, and ratepayers.
yeah, the
So-
ratepayers mainly.
Well, the taxpayers when we get saddled with the debt that ICBC is running up. And so by limiting the number of expert witnesses either side could bring in, it looked like it was going to save ICBC like $500 million a year, until the court said, actually, that kind of violates the rights of people in the court system to have a fair trial. So back to the drawing board, or maybe the appeal court. We'll see where that goes. But I think that kind of highlights that, at least for me, if you have a private insurer in there bringing as many expert witnesses, it's kind of irrelevant whether it's a public or private insurer. They're still running up the court fees. So it's complicated and messy. And yeah, I'm not sympathetic to the break the ICBC up, but I don't envy anyone trying to solve this mess of an issue. Let's go on to the next file, real practical action to protect our environment. Here's their climate change commitments, which is a promise to focus on clean air and water, get serious about protecting wildlife like our wild salmon, and position BC to lead the global charge on clean energy.
That sounds good.
Yeah, I mean, the BC Liberals do have some bona fides on climate change. They introduced the carbon tax and started BC down a pretty good path there. There's another section in here where they talk about how our natural resources like LNG are part of the solution, not the problem. And that line is a link to an interview in the Post Millennial, which is a kind of conservative talking head website. And it's an interview with their own MLA, Ellis Ross, who basically is just defending the LNG industry. I guess we're still going to be litigating whether less bad fossil fuels are still part of the solution for the next election here in BC.
Oh, for sure. Well, actually, maybe not even all that much. Just both the NDP and the Liberals are on Team LNG.
Just different enthusiasm levels.
Mm-hmm.
Or I guess it just
Well,
depends who the NDP is
NDP
talking to.
Yeah, the NDP did give LNG Canada some pretty lucrative tax credits on it, so it's hard to say that they're not at least somewhat enthusiastic about it, even if they don't necessarily like to mention that when campaigning in downtown Vancouver.
Yeah. I mean, it would have been nice to see a bit more in here. Like, are the BC Liberals going to be campaigning for something stronger than Clean BC that's been rolled out? Or do they think there's big holes in it? Or will they just continue that plus, like, the big question we have with the Clean BC plan that's been rolled out by the BC government is how do we get the other 25% of our climate targets? If the Liberals offered an answer, that'd be cool. Next, we'll put the next two together, actually. They go really well together. First, they're standing up for BC resource industries, and then there's Get Trans Mountain built.
So, BC resource industry, Alberta resource industry.
Well, they're the only party standing up for rural BC and the way of life that the NDP have written off and walked away from. In that section, they're mostly complaining about the...
Forestry industry?
Yeah, 100%, which it needs a champion, and I'm glad to see the BC Liberals standing up for it. I'm not convinced they have any better solutions because it's a really, again, difficult global market conditions are screwing it. And unless you just nationalize it all and like create trade barriers that BC doesn't have the ability to do, it's difficult.
It's not happening.
Yeah.
The Liberals heavily aren't campaigning on that.
On the Trans Mountain side, it's more for them about lowering gas prices in Metrovan, sort of. So they talk about building TMX to provide a secure, affordable, and reliable fuel supply, even though originally the pipeline was to move dilbit from the oil sands to tankers to go to China. who also doesn't seem enthusiastic about buying hard to refine product.
Yeah, although I think it wasn't just China. It was also like Korea and Japan
And
a lot of the
probably
Asian
also like
Vietnam.
refineries in the Gulf of Mexico via the Panama Canal. Because why not? My favorite line in this section, though, is if John Horgan wants to fight this pipeline all the way to the Supreme Court of Canada, then the NDP, not BC taxpayers, should foot the bill. Which is like nice rhetoric, but not how our system works.
Oh yeah. But yeah, it's not bad rhetoric, and platforms are above all else a communications document, so not surprising to see it.
I mean, if we can get the NDP to cover the cost of that Supreme Court challenge, can we get the BC Liberals to cover the cost of all the Supreme Court challenges with the BCTF? Just saying. All right, for that stuff hacking on the BC Liberals, here's the one I really like, is equal pay for women. And they promise to fight to make sure women and men get equal pay at work. And this one references a private member's bill I think we've talked about in the past that they've introduced that would basically boost the pay transparency required for major companies to show, not to require them to pay equal for equal work. That's the Human Rights Code that does that already, but to at least show how they're doing and let us start holding companies to account. And I think it's a really good bill that should be passed, but the NDP have, like most private members' bills, gone, oh, that's nice, how nice of you, and then just ignored it. So yeah, I'm glad to see the BC Liberals campaigning on this and including it in there. It's near the end, though. And finally, they will end the NDP's big union handout, which is the community benefits agreement. And they would just tear that up and, go with the lowest contract.
Yeah, that's one of those things that oscillates between the parties every time they change governments.
Yeah, it's not surprising. We've talked about this already. I think there's a value to the community benefit agreement. It's definitely not
little
just
less
a handout.
sympathetic to it, but we're not investing enough in infrastructure already. We should try and get the most bang for our buck.
They do
in terms of
suggest
just getting stuff built.
They do suggest the subway, the Broadway subway, will cost an extra $1 billion because of this, which seems like a made-up number.
That's high.
Also, they complain that Patello Bridge is not getting any extra lanes of traffic. They're like, we're going to have to pay $100 million more for the Patello Bridge, and we're not getting an extra lane for that.
Yeah, but the lanes will stay up.
And you won't be worried about running into other cars. And also, it's not an underbuilt bridge. It's just too narrow and falling down. But all in all, that's what the BC Liberals have put forward. What do you think?
For a first pass, it's not bad. And that's what this is. It's a kind of test the waters, put out some ideas, see where the interest is and build off it or tweak some stuff. And it's mostly what you'd expect from the BC Liberals. I do like that they've emphasized a lot of the Metro Vancouver stuff fairly near the top, which is a nice change from a lot of their past communications and rhetoric.
Yeah, if I had to find the theme for this, like they have their tagline, opportunity for all of BC, but it's
the NDP side. Like that's really a lot of...
That's what most of the wording in there is.
Yes.
It's like if you searched it for John Horgan and NDP, that would come up more than anything else. But I would say the theme is actually around what the BC Liberals have always tried to be, that like create the economic opportunity for BC to thrive with a hint of like affordability matters. But it's in that way, it's sort of the same that they ran on in the last two elections.
And keep in mind, they got the most seats in the last two elections. Like this is the formula that has worked very well for the BC Liberals, and they were, past their prime after 16 years in government. There was definitely some affordability issues they were seen not to be paying enough attention to because they kind of weren't. But it's a tried and true formula for a reason, and if they can update it to address the present challenges, it's probably going to be a fairly successful one.
Well, and I said off the start of this segment, and we'll wrap it up shortly, that one of the biggest challenges they're facing is the Green Party, and maybe the Greens, without Andrew Weaver at the helm, won't pose much of a threat, but it's also feasible that a new leader may pose more of a threat, in which case the Liberals need something stronger, I think, on climate change to, get those red Greens. That's a TV show. But the, liberalish, the right, center-right Green Party supporters to come back to the Liberals, to the BC Liberals, and vote in support of, we can have the economy and industry together, Justin Trudeau type line, which will still play well in a lot of BC.
Yeah, well, when you get three parties, you get these weird splits. So it's always a little hard to predict, but the Greens are most likely, if they're going to really eat into someone enough to pick up seats, it's probably going to be South Island, which is NDP territory. So the Liberals really just have to avoid the vote split on that, and yeah, maybe they'll need to shore that up a bit, but they're probably more worried about winning the kind of outer belt of suburbia that kind of switches a lot.
There's no Uber and Lyft in here. I guess they're just assuming it'll be done by December, like the NDP is saying.
Maybe?
Notice
Although
that's in like a few weeks, so we still don't have it. Like, neither of us are huge, like, ride sharing must happen. I think you're a bit more supportive of it, but it's just like...
Yeah, I think a lot of the anti-positions are like a little overblown, but yeah, it's also not going to be the transportation savior that some people on the pro side paint it as.
But that's the BC Liberals.
Moving on to segment 2, independent senators for senatorial independence. Man, there are just so many new Senate groups popping up.
Did we get a chance to talk about the Canada Senate group?
I think we might have made a very brief shout out to it in a recent episode.
So the news now is that in addition to the Canada Senate group, which is a few independent senators or formerly independent senators
And a couple conservatives kind of merging forces.
creating a party, quote-unquote party of 11, which qualifies for money from the Senate, and they're now the Canada Senate group. Notably, they were all Stephen Harper appointees, so they're it's a small c conservative Senate group, is the way I see it. And that's easy to remember because it's the CSG. But now we have one that's even more clear what they're about, and it's the Progressive Senate group, which, ironically or not, is made up entirely of the former Liberal Senate caucus.
To be fair, that is really on brand for the Liberals of painting themselves as probably more progressive than they are.
It's also a group whose average age I read was 71, and that kind of tells you why they created a new group, because mandatory retirement age is 75 in the Senate, and all of these members will be retired in the next 5 or 6 years, with 2 of them retiring in as soon as February, in which case they won't get their money. So they needed to somehow attract additional members.
So the idea is to pull off some of the ISG, the Independent Senators group.
So, who are the Progressive Senate group? They are a group united by a belief in liberty and equality and a commitment to a progressive vision of Canada where the government has a positive role to play in advancing the public interest. To be a member, you must support progressive politics, the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. You can't be one of those anti-charter senators.
Actually, it wouldn't surprise me if there's a few people on the parliamentary supremacist side kicking around the Conservative caucus.
The Charter gives Parliament supremacy, though, through the notwithstanding clause. Well, to some parts, I guess.
To some parts, yeah.
That's true. All right.
We should be like the UK where Parliament is truly supreme view hasn't entirely gone away in Canada. There's probably a few senators hanging on to it.
And finally, to join the Progressive Senate group, you must be committed to advancing reconciliation with Indigenous peoples. There will not be whipping of the votes in this group, at least to vote in favor of the Liberal government's agenda, and that's basically who they are. So, together with the Progressive Senate group, we already mentioned the Canadian Senate group, we've alluded to the Independent Senators group, which is 51 senators, so it's a majority. It's just shy of a majority of the Senate. And then you have the Conservative Party, who have 25 senators. There are 4 more senators who are unaffiliated. That would be the government representatives in the Senate and the Speaker. And then there's 5 vacancies. So we're starting to see a weird mishmash of parties in the Senate.
This was kind of inevitable once the Liberals kicked all the senators out of their caucus and then appointed a bunch of independent senators, that the Senate would kind of break down more along, not necessarily ideological lines, but lines of various priorities and whatnot. And it wouldn't surprise me if we see even more groups form in the future, going after all sorts of things. You might have the, pipeline caucus or something.
There would definitely be a pipeline group.
Yes.
If you listen to the latest episode of Boys in Short Pants that we're both going through right now,
and
it's
actually,
all about secret parliamentary groups, and not so secret ones, but the secret ones are the interesting ones.
Yeah, also shout out to Boys in Short Pants, because when we move into this shortly on kind of how the government's been dealing with this, they're definitely the people to listen to if you want arcane parliamentary and senatorial procedures.
So that raises the question, how will legislation get through the Senate, particularly in a minority parliament where getting through the House of Commons is going to be tough enough? So with those vacancies, there's 96 senators right now. The Speaker won't vote except in a tie, so that means there's 95 votes. So a majority is 48 votes. Assuming all the Conservatives are always going against the government, there's 70 possible votes that Justin Trudeau needs to pick off to get a bill through. He'll get his 3 votes from his government representatives. If he doesn't, why are they representing the government? And that leaves 45 he needs to get. So as long as he can still get the ISG, or most of that's 51, but maybe some of them will keep moving around. The Progressive Senate group represents 9. Maybe he'll never get the Conservatives or the Canadian Senate group. So math starts to get hard, especially if there's further rearrangement, which we could realistically get to the point with 5 or 6 parties all floating around 10 to 20 seats.
Yeah, then just as interesting, it wouldn't surprise me if he's able to pick up the votes of those, the Canada Senate group, just because even though they're like small C Conservatives, they've broken off from the big C parties, so they're not necessarily going to be we can't let the Liberals get a win, because partisanship.
And I think the thing we did see in the last Parliament was the Senate is a much bigger stumbling block for legislation, big or small. And that's just going to further throw a wrench into the plans.
So the Liberal government hasn't been particularly great at just doing the business of Parliament and shuffling bills through the process. So that's part of it. But also, because of how the senators have been appointed as changed, there's a higher degree of legitimacy conferred upon them. Nowhere near the actually elected degree of legitimacy, but because there's a whole process of a advisory panel picking, in theory, the most qualified or the most suitable senators, that does give them a little more legitimacy than the partisan hats that are all too common otherwise, and kind of the perception of the Senate otherwise. And because of that, they've been exercising their muscle a little more as they feel more empowered and legitimate to do so. And it'll be interesting to see if that continues and they spend a lot more time, picking apart legislation, holding hearings, and sending it back for reconsideration more often.
Well, one of the best pieces of evidence to that thesis is within the lobbying registry, the number of people who say they're lobbying senators is just skyrocketed in the last few years. Like prior to the Trudeau term, no one talked to senators because
they'd vote along party lines, and they weren't going to do anything to tweak the legislation very much.
Like maybe if you got called by committee, you'd argue vehemently that this or that needs to change, and they might actually listen. And a few other people did write senators, but there was no concerted efforts. And now, I've written senators and I've told other people to write senators, and I've seen them change bills. And then Parliament or the House of Commons say yes or no, depending on what the wins were and what the bill was. But that introduces, yet another issue here where we have unelected people being lobbied by other unelected people who are claiming to represent the masses. So this can all come to a head as the United Kingdom learned, not in the current crisis, but back in 1909 when a different Liberal government, one of their last, I think, was swept in, and they tried to pass what was colloquially known as the People's Budget. This included some very popular measures like land taxes on the wealthy landowners, and it got through the House of Commons and was killed by the Conservative-dominated House of Lords, triggering an election. The Liberals were re-elected in January of 1910. They ran on a promise of House of Lords reform. For whatever reason, they had to run another election in December of that year. It was a very tumultuous, 18 months in Britain. And when they finally got government in 1911, they just basically filled the House of Lords with Liberals and then passed the new Parliament Act of 1911, which was later strengthened in 1949. Why am I bringing this up? Because this tells us what a solution to the House of Lords or our Senate killing bills is. And that bill basically says the Lords could only delay money bills or budgets for a month. So they need to pass the legislation. They can't kill the things. and other public bills, basic legislation by the government, at that point could only be delayed for up to 2 years, and now can only be delayed for a year. So they can stall things, but they can't kill things. And that had kind of been the tradition, but traditions that aren't written down and mandated can sometimes fall apart. And right now we kind of have the tradition being established that the Senate won't kill something, but how long do we want to hope for that? So I'm a big advocate for a Parliament Act of Canada, and that's my little rant that I wrote into here.
Okay. The only thing I'm not quite sure of is exactly where the Constitution lines up with this, because Britain doesn't have a constitution. They
don't have a written
constitution, yes. Which also gives Parliament a lot more flexibility to change how Parliament works and how laws get passed and everything, whereas here, Senate reforms run into the problem of having to amend the Constitution to do stuff, and I don't actually have in front of me whether or not this would need that or not.
Yeah, I don't know that. I put that question in here as well because I think it's an interesting one. Stephen Harper famously ran the Senate reform question through the Supreme Court of Canada, and they came back saying, elected senators, you got to go to a referendum or get the consent of the provinces. You got to get 7 provinces representing 50% of the population. And the same thing if you want to abolish the Senate.
No, abolishing the Senate required a unanimous.
Oh, unanimous.
Yes.
Right. Even harder. The NDP's platform's even bolder and less achievable. But can Parliament, can the House of Commons and Senate come together and agree that the Senate can't kill bills? They can until they can't, until they get a Senate where it feels like a fixed budget law or a balanced budget law.
Well, we're clearly going to have to do some research because when this gets thrown in there a couple hours before recording, I don't have time to do it.
That's fine.
Well, yeah, we'll look into it for next week maybe.
Yes.
But yeah, a bunch of open questions on how the Senate's going to handle itself and whether or not things will eventually come to a head.
Definitely something to watch going forward. And that launches us perfectly into Quick Takes, where the first couple are on Parliament itself. Following the election, there were questions about when Parliament will return. We knew that Trudeau was planning to name his cabinet on the 20th, but the question would be, will there be a short session before the holiday break, or will they just put off until January? Well, it looks like Parliament's going to come back on December 5th for the election of a speaker, a throne speech, and then 6 days later, on the 13th, they're all going to go on break. The Senate will stick around for an extra week debating something.
Oh, probably the Bill 1, the Parliamentary Supremacy Act or Sovereignty Act.
Some of those aren't passed.
Yeah, that's true.
Speaking of wonky, nerdy bits, I mean, the things to watch there will be who's elected speaker, because we know Elizabeth May is actually gunning for the job.
She's not going to get speaker.
Who are the votes who are going to go for Elizabeth May? Unless they just...
There's 2 Green votes, plus May herself, I guess. 3 votes, maybe.
I think the bigger question will be what's in the throne speech. What goodies will Trudeau throw in to try to win votes from the NDP, the Bloc, or maybe even just the Conservatives? I feel like he's going to have enough to get it through. It's not hard.
So nobody wants to go into another election right now?
Exactly that. And the less politically relevant fact, but just kind of interesting for those who watch Parliament, is they're going to be meeting in the temporary House of Commons for the first time while Centre Block is under renovations.
Didn't they meet there towards the end of last session?
At least the one thing I read is that the procession after the throne speech, which we haven't had a throne speech for 4 years because there was a single session in that last Parliament, which was weird because Trudeau was opposed to prorogation.
Even procedurally?
There wasn't a single prorogation in the entire last Parliament.
I know the one. I'm just asking about his prorogation's bad, even it extends to the we'll do it for a day just to clear the order paper.
Correct. Yeah. That's how he also couldn't clear the order paper because he hadn't cleared his legislative goals.
Like we said, the Liberals have been bad at parliamenting.
So the one thing that's weird about moving the House of Commons now is that there's generally a procession of MPs to the Senate after the throne speech or before the throne speech, somewhere in this ceremonial stuff. And now I think that they're going to have to walk down Wellington Street in Ottawa, so they're all going to have to go outside in December in Ottawa. So that'll be interesting and creates, I guess, security and other nightmares. But we need to keep our parliament from collapsing.
Well, in a more figurative question of collapsing parliaments, the NDP have laid out their demands or requests for a throne speech. They say it's not an ultimatum, but it's kind of phrased as an ultimatum because, yeah, if we won't vote for you, if you don't do these things, that's an ultimatum. But they've laid these out on what it takes for them to support a throne speech, and that is a national farmer care program that gets into gear basically immediately rather than doing what the Liberals want to do, drag it out for a while, as well as openness to dental coverage, whatever openness means.
Yeah, it's really vague. It's not a strong statement from Jagmeet Singh. He also,
to be fair, he doesn't have a huge amount of leverage here. Yeah, Trudeau needs a party to support him, but everybody knows the NDP isn't going to want to fight another election when their post-election coffers are so low.
Yeah. The other interesting thing he's talking about in this Globe and Mail article is that the government should drop the challenge to the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal ruling on Indigenous children welfare. This came up during the election because there was a ruling in the summer that the government needs to pay out a lot of money to Indigenous children that had been abused by the welfare system. And in the middle of the election, the government announced that they were going to appeal the costs order and say, we don't know if we should have to pay that much. And, test the requirement of it. And I get there's a legal argument that you want to make sure that that's not the precedent for future binding costs orders. But politically, it looks really bad when you're like fighting
took
children.
A lot of heat on that one.
Yeah. It's also one of those cases where it's not the same as SNC, but it is asking the government to be more active in the Justice Department. And it's not the same because it is a political decision whether to intervene or not. But usually it's kind of left a bit more to the AG, I think. Lawyers, write us in. So, all in all, Singh says he's keeping an open mind. He's not drawing any lines in the sand, but he's making it really clear what he's prepared to vote against if it doesn't reflect the important things Canadians sent us here to do, which is not electoral reform, which is not childcare, which is not abolishing the Senate. That wasn't even really talked about actually this year. It wasn't stopping Trans Mountain. It was primarily just pharmacare, which I think is a good program, a good first step. And if we can get that, that'll be a big win. But the Liberals were already talking about that, so it wasn't even like a green jobs, climate change action, just pharmacare. But like you said, he doesn't have a lot of options when Trudeau has lots of options. One of the options he's not going to be relying too much on, though, is probably the Greens, who have only 3 seats, which doesn't make a difference. No offense. The Greens' current interim leader is Joanne Roberts, who was in the news this week talking about the Green leadership race, which an interim leader generally shouldn't do.
Yeah, in fact, that's kind of the one job the interim leader has, is hold the party together and keep the factions that are going to be duking it out in the leadership race from
destroying each other.
Yeah, destroying each other. And to do that, they generally stay out of the leadership race.
Well, Roberts didn't take a side between any Green factions.
Yeah, she wanted a whole new faction in there.
The same one Elizabeth May wanted, which is Jody Wilson-Raybould. And Roberts was quoted talking about how she hopes Wilson-Raybould will join the Green Party and consider running for its leader. But Roberts says this without having even talked to Wilson-Raybould about this, which is the same thing Elizabeth May did.
Yes.
Repeatedly.
And Jody Wilson-Raybould had the option to run as a Green, which was also weird that the Green Party leader showed up to campaign for someone who wasn't the Green Party candidate in a riding the Green Party was running a candidate in. See, yeah, Green Party, stop trying to make Jody Wilson-Raybould happen. It's not going to happen.
And don't do these negotiations in public. They're embarrassing.
Yeah, it really does make the Green Party look like amateur hour. Well, moving on to new vaping rules that have been announced by the province today. Health Minister Adrian Ditz announced that they're going to be increasing taxes on vaping products from the normal PST amount up to 20%, as well as introducing advertising restrictions, nicotine content limits, plain packaging, and this is largely to get vaping products out of the hands of kids. And it's a lot of the same stuff you see with cigarettes and whatnot.
Yeah, this all looks pretty good. There has been a market increase in teenage vaping because it's cool or something. And a lot of it is clearly marketed towards kids and teenagers with flavored vapes and all these kind of things. And there's like some warnings that should not be used by children because nicotine is damaging to the developing brain. But it's trying to be cool. It's what smoking was decades ago. Now, I got into an argument earlier today with someone about like vaping's not as bad as smoking. Like there's a lot of this moral panic-esque, why haven't we done anything yet? This is out of control. People are dying. And it's like, that's not true. There are 3 people that the BC, health authority says have diseases possibly linked to vaping. 3. Yeah. And then there's...
The CDC in the States has also identified several potential cases. So there's some indications that this may be more dangerous than previously thought.
I don't think anyone ever said it was, perfectly safe. It's just a comparative thing. This is harm reduction, right? This is basic stuff. Like, the biggest issue is people going from nothing to vaping. Like, that we should not be having, but let's not ban vapes. Like, they are a market improvement over cigarettes in every way. Like, there's a lot of unknowns, but the knowns are that they're not as bad. They don't contain hundreds of chemicals that we know cause lung cancer. When the worst thing happens is you get a knockoff one that explodes in your face. That's bad. But then that just demands regulation. So I think these are a good balanced regulation. It's noted that, I saw a lot of people going, why didn't we have these sooner? And the BC government's being good to say, we're actually one of the first provinces in Canada to come out with regulations, and they're the strongest. So kudos on that. Maybe they're not the first regulations, but, it's something they didn't know. And I think Dick's even had a good line out there saying, he didn't raise questions about this when he was in opposition because, it wasn't on the agenda. And now it is, and here's what they're responding with. So let's hope it gets vapes out of kids' hands, but still makes vapes available for those who, for whatever reason, still smoke cigarettes because they're addictive. But if vaping's not cool, one thing that is really cool are these new ferries that BC is going to get. BC Ferries has a press release out that the contract has just been awarded for 4 new hybrid ferries that are being built at Damen shipyards in the Netherlands. And these are not just hybrid ferries, but they'll be full electric ready as soon as we have the charging and battery infrastructure in place. These are more island class ferries like the last set they ordered, and they'll be in service by 2022. Yeah,
cool sets of ships they're buying. And yeah, it's interesting to see electric propulsion really taking off.
Guess we'll need that Site C.
Yep, probably will. But yeah, it's actually surprised how quickly the technology's moved on this. Storage has been a huge challenge for these large ships. And, aircraft too.
Yeah, these will fill the routes on Powell River to Texada Island, Port McNeill, Alert Bay, Sontula Island, the Campbell River Quadra Island route, and there'll be 2 on the Nanaimo Harbor Gabriola Island route.
Right. Oh, those last are fairly short hops.
Yeah, and they'll be close enough to Vancouver for us to go try them sometime because they look really cool. There's a picture in the press release. I didn't notice that at first. They're sleek.
Yeah, cool looking ships. It's not the first contract BC's had with the shipyard. They're currently doing some patching on the new C-Bus we are getting here after sea trials revealed a buoyancy issue. Always a good thing to catch.
It's like the basics of building a boat is make sure it's buoyant. Or was it too buoyant?
I think it might be. I'd have to...
Is that too high? Hopefully they're better at building these, and hopefully the NDP doesn't run into a fast ferry scandal. Or I guess this would be a hybrid ferry scandal.
That's probably a little less likely. It's definitely not as bad as the Greek ferry that the Liberals bought at the end of there.
BC's long history of ferry-related scandals, I feel like, is a good place to end this episode.
And that has been Politos. Find links to everything we talked about at politos.ca. Support the show and get access to our exclusive Slack channel at patreon.com/Politos. Intro music credit is Beautiful British Columbia by Tristan Plotnikoff. Editing services are provided by Cortado Productions. Thanks for listening.